I have bad news for Christians who are waiting eagerly to reach heaven. Very likely, you and I may not make the grade. Let me tell you why. Welcome, Vanakkam, Swagatham. A believer is supposed to be one who is just biding his time upon planet Earth before he or she is gathered into the blissful heavenly existence in paradise with Jesus. After all, didn't Jesus say to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise"? If a thief can make it, and that too in the final hour, why not I, a traditional Christian who has led a scrupulously church centric life, complying with all the prescriptions and practices associated with the sect denomination of tradition of Christianity to which I happen to belong by accident of birth? Who can disqualify me? Who can prevent me from entering heaven and taking possession of my heavenly mansion? So, this is the way most people think. But the more I examine biblical evidence, the more I examine the teachings of Jesus Christ, the more anxious and worried I become. And I know that immediately there are people who would pounce on me and say that, "Oh, you of little faith." But just wait a minute before you come to conclusions. Now, in one of my earlier videos, I tried to sound a note of caution based on Jesus is saying that in those days many will come to me, saying, "Lord, Lord, in your name we did wonders, we prophesied, we cast out demons, we healed diseases, we even raised the dead. But in those days I will tell them, 'Depart from me, you evildoers, I have never known you. I know you not.'" That video was in Malayalam. That's the reason why I make a reference to it here without venturing into a recapitulation of the main points there in order to avoid repetition. So, Jesus in that text, that is Matthew chapter 7, verses 21, 22, 23, is shattering the complacency of traditional Christians who, for want of spiritual insight, assume or expect that simply because they have conformed to certain church prescribed formula of religiosity, they have successfully booked for themselves a mansion in heaven. And it's impossible to read these words of Jesus Christ, howsoever minuscule they are, and still retain the habitual complacency of smugness in this respect. Then you think of a parable like the parable of the sheep and the goats, where again the religious formula is shattered. Who are the people who find acceptance into the presence of God? Not the people who have followed a church tradition, church formula, a church ritual. They are the people who responded to the needs of their fellow human beings. Actually, there is nothing overtly religious about their life. And the beautiful thing about them is that they are completely unaware of being religious. They are even completely unaware of doing any good either. And they are the people who find welcome and acceptance in the world to come. And all those who followed this laborious religious formula, prescriptions, etc., find themselves excluded. Now think of another passage, Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, "Do not gather for yourself treasures on earth, where the moth eats, the rust corrupts, and the thief breaks in and steals. Gather up for yourself treasures in heaven. Now the question is, what does Jesus mean by treasures in heaven? Now there are two things to be noted here. Very simple, very straightforward, nothing very complicated. The first thing is that you need to have an eligibility, you need to meet an eligibility requirement to enter heaven. That is to say, you have to be rich. Heaven is only for the rich. But that richness is very different from the wealth of this world. That's where the problem lies. What Christians want, what every human being wants on this earth is worldly wealth. And even God is invoked and religiosity practiced or retained only to secure an unmerited and large chunk of earthly wealth. Super added to that is the expectation out of sheer covetousness of being able to extend earthly felicity into the world to come. But primarily, our hearts are attached only to the wealth of this world, though we are not honest enough to acknowledge it. So, Jesus shatters this concept, this religiosity. When he said, "Do not gather up for yourself treasures on this earth," he clearly meant that your religiosity is all directed towards or aimed at gathering for yourself treasures upon this earth. You try to cultivate God, you try to be in His good books only because you think that it's profitable. After all, isn't it a popular assumption that if you give to God, you'll get 15 times multiplied, get back. You will get back whatever you have given 15 times multiplied. What a profitable investment it is. There is no real estate business or oil business or share market which is as tempting as this. Give 10 rupees to God and you get 150 rupees back. So ultimately, our religious charity, the piety, our eagerness to keep God well humored, our punctuality in reading the Bible, praying, etc., all this has only one aim, and that is to keep God on our side, because by doing so, we can assure ourselves of a bumper worldly harvest. And beyond that, if there is some possibility of gaining something in life after death, why not? So that is precisely where we stand. And Jesus, realizing this, teaches in this manner: do not gather for yourself treasures on earth, because that is precisely what people are all the time running after. And Jesus also says that whatever treasures that you gather upon earth are perishable, and it cannot be taken into the other world, and therefore they can have no reference to the eligibility requirement for entering heaven. That much is absolutely clear. But now what we need to be a little more clear about is, what is this treasures in heaven that we had to gather while we are upon this earth? The paradox is that the treasures of heaven cannot be gathered in heaven. By then it will be too late. Because to enter heaven, you need to have the treasures of heaven. Just like if you want to enter the United States, you need to have the US visa. If you need to enter the UK, you need to have the UK visa. So, in order to enter heaven, you need to have the treasures of heaven. But you have to get the UK visa not after entering UK, but before you reach there. Therefore, UK visa has to be obtained when you are in India, or when you are in Bangladesh, or when you are in Sri Lanka, or wherever you are, when you want to travel to the UK, right? In a similar manner, the treasures which you need to gather, which constitute your eligibility requirement for membership in heaven has to be gathered before you enter heaven, and that is to say, that treasure has to be gathered while you are in this world. That is why there is a continuity between your life upon planet Earth and your life to come, life after death. Now, here Jesus says that the only wealth, the only treasure that's valid in heaven, if at all you believe in heaven, is the treasure of your personality, the treasure of your authentic, godly, spiritually illumined self. But the point, of course, is that hardly anyone is interested in this. Now, let's understand this because it's a theme of such immense significance. Time devoted to understanding this is not time, to understand this is not time wasted, but time gained, and gained forever. Now, what did Jesus mean by gathering up treasures in heaven? They are treasures of heaven, therefore treasures in heaven. But as I said, treasures of heaven to be gathered before you enter heaven, because that's gathering those treasures is a very eligibility requirement for entering heaven. All right. Now, let us consider a few examples of people encountering Jesus. After all, He is the way, He is the life, He is the truth, as Christians believe. Non-Christians are not obliged to believe this, but Christians are obliged to believe this. And Christians also believe that He is the way to heaven. Because after all, Jesus said, except through me, no one reaches the Father. Now, it is therefore very profitable, relevant, useful to examine some of the encounters that that Jesus had with people, and the impact of those encounters. Now, I have said a lot about the episode recorded in John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman, so I'm not going to take up that example in this discussion, though that is extremely and profoundly relevant. Let's consider another example, that of Zacchaeus, found in the 19th chapter of Luke's Gospel. He was a tax collector, and like all tax collectors, he was rich. And because he was a smart tax collector and a very unscrupulous one, he was the richest man in the city. And but he had a problem. He had all the riches of this world, the perishable riches of the world, but he was extremely poor in terms of the treasures of heaven. And fortunately for him, he realized that he was so poor and bankrupt, even as he was surrounded by a life of worldly riches. It was this that motivated him to do whatever he could to meet with Jesus, well, if not to meet with Jesus, at least to catch a passing glimpse of the Galilean. So he goes and climbs a sycamore tree beside a road by which Jesus was supposed to pass. That's when Jesus stops when he comes near the sycamore tree and says, Lazarus, you come down, for I should stay with you tonight. Now, what happens to Lazarus? Suddenly you find a complete transformation in him. And what is the transformation? He begins to behave as unlike a tax collector as possible. Please pay attention to this. The consequence of Zacchaeus encountering Jesus is that thereafter he begins to behave as unlike a stereotypical tax collector does. If a tax collector is an expert in extorting money, this redeemed tax collector called Zacchaeus is now giving away his wealth. Half my wealth I give to the poor. Unthinkable in the context of a stereotypical tax collector whose expertise would be in taxing even the poor. And if I have extorted anything from people, I'll give 5 times back. Now, you suddenly feel that this diminutive, physically diminutive, dwarfish tax collector is growing in stature, growing in stature, growing in stature. He almost becomes a giant of a spiritual man. He becomes a spiritual giant. He is gathering for himself treasures in heaven. It's not a question of practicing charity alone. It's a question of discovering the true self within him. The self that was in ascendancy over him as a tax collector, the self that was distinguished by unbridled covetousness and the hard-heartedness that went with it, that was not his true self. That was a caricature of a man called Zacchaeus. Through this encounter with Jesus, what happens to this man is that from being a mere tax collector, he becomes a human being. And he begins to realize his true self. And therefore, something of a celebration comes into his personality. He radiates life. He radiates happiness. He radiates a positive energy. And because of him now, people around him get blessed. That is the proof that a divine encounter has taken place. That is the proof that this individual, from being a caricature of a human being, has now become an authentic self who knows that he has to gather up for himself treasures in heaven. Now, think of another instance, again an instance to which I have made occasional references in the past, the instance of Nicodemus found in the 3rd chapter of John's Gospel. Why did he have to come and see the Galilean? He was, after all, the leader of the Jews. He was a religious leader, perhaps equivalent of one of our bishops. And precisely for that reason, he didn't have the freedom to come and meet with Jesus in broad daylight, because that would have jeopardized his religious position, which indicates the state of unfreedom there always exists within organized religion. Organized religion preaches freedom but practices slavery. And if you want any illustration for that, it is Nicodemus. Even the leader is a slave to the system. And his preeminence is purchased at the cost of his personal freedom, the freedom even to interact with a fellow human being who his conscience recognizes to be a source of light. That's the ultimate slavery. The unfreedom or the lack of freedom to relate to a personality of light, after which your soul thirsts. There is no bondage, there is no slavery worse than this. Even a slave is free in this respect, but a religious leader is not. It's something that nobody can afford to overlook. So what happens to him? Jesus gives him a significant message. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you turn back and unless you are born again, you will not see the kingdom of God. He has to be born again. He has to become a different self in order to be the true self. The self that he is now identifying himself with is not his true self. It's the artificial self concocted within a system which does not give him the freedom to be his true, authentic self. My dear friends, if you cannot be true to your own authentic self, how miserable is your plight and mine? And yet this is a price that we have to pay to belong to any organized human effort, because every human system is a system ultimately of slavery one way or another. There is no man-made system of pure freedom. And the only realm of pure freedom is the realm of the Holy Spirit. Unfortunately, that is not the sense in which Christians understand the significance of the Spirit. Christians insist on understanding the Holy Spirit in magical and cult fashion or cultic fashion, which is extremely unfortunate. That's not the meaning of the Spirit of God. So, Nicodemus, through this encounter, at least realizes that he has been living and he still is living an inauthentic life. He is not himself, he is somebody else, he is somebody other than himself. Or think of a person like Mary Magdalene. In the 8th chapter of Luke's Gospel, you find her a sorely troubled woman, infested with 7 demons. Another picture of being completely alienated from oneself, unable to come anywhere near the true self that she is. And by encountering Jesus Christ, she gains the right and the freedom to discover her true self and see how beautiful that self is. And the rest of her life is a celebration of the beauty of her being. That beauty will endure unto eternity. You think of any encounter of people with Jesus Christ recorded in the Gospels in the New Testament, and tell me if, barring 1 or 2 examples, these are negative examples to illustrate the same point, like in the case of the rich young man found in the 19th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. You tell me if there is one positive encounter a human being has had with Jesus which does not result in the complete transformation of his personality, which actually means that he becomes his true self. Therefore, my friends, the most sobering insight that we can get from all these encounters is that universally, everyone, including you and me, we are living completely alienated from our true self. What we consider to be our self, or the person that we are or the persons that we are, it is an artificial creation. From birth onwards, we have been conditioned, we have been brainwashed, we have been trained like dogs are trained to be certain types of people, to fit into certain molds, to play certain roles. Nobody is bothered about, and nobody can be bothered about your true personality because it's a mystery. Who you are is a mystery, therefore no human being can understand it. Human beings can relate to you only in terms of certain external functions. And all that others and society included will ensure is that in terms of the external functions that you discharge, you become a useful member. Whether that usefulness, which the society values, has anything to do with your true self is a question that nobody is interested in. It's a question in which only God is interested because God is your creator. Now here let me introduce an idea, and with that I'll close. It's a slightly subtle idea, and I'm sure you will catch it, you can understand it if you have a little patience. Not much intelligence is required, a little patience. Think of the Old Testament description of the creation of human beings. Genesis chapter 1, 26, 27. In his image and likeness he created them, male and female he created them. Just concentrate on these words, very easy to remember. Or concentrate only this much. In his image and likeness he created them. Easy to learn these words by heart. In his image and likeness. The 2 most important words here are image and likeness. He created them. Don't worry about male and female he created them. What does it mean? In other words, human beings have 2 dimensions. One is image and the other is likeness. We are primarily God's image. Image is the essence, the authentic divine element. Now, superadded to that is the likeness. That is how it will appear within this matrix of time and space in terms of worldly parameters. For example, suppose you and I sit face to face with each other, or we are working together, we are encountering each other, whatever. There are two things about me that you will experience. One is my essence, and the other is how I behave. And for example, sometimes we say that he is acting out of character. That is, he is contradicting his real personality, his real self, by behaving in the way he is doing at the present time. Sometimes we say, oh, how could he have done this? Meaning, having known the person or knowing the person that he is, I can't believe that he could have done this particular thing. So there what we are actually saying is that there is a contradiction between his true self and his actions. Or think of the other possibility. You've taken a person to be a rogue or a rascal or a dishonest person or a papoo or a mentally a dull wit. And for 5-10 years, you entertain that image of the person. But one day, that person strikes you as a genius. Then you are stunned. You say, what happened to all my experiences of this man spread over a period of 10 years? Now he comes through to me as something entirely different. Who is the real person? That dull-witted person, or now this new genius that I've encountered? For example, people who had known Simon and his brother Andrew before Jesus called him. Imagine one of them. And imagine the same person meeting with Simon and Andrew 6 months after they left everything and joined Jesus to be his disciples. Wouldn't that person have this kind of serious dilemma? Am I really meeting with the Simon I saw 6 months ago, 10 months ago, or Andrew 10 months ago? How unlike the Simon and Andrew I knew. And it is to denote this huge difference between who they were and who they have become that Jesus renamed Simon as Peter. A change in name is needed because there is a change in essence. Now, if I may put this idea in philosophical terms, there are two things about us. One is the essence and the other is the existence. Or in broader terms, God is the essence, the whole of creation is the existence. Essence translates itself into existence through the barrier between eternity and time. And when that happens, a certain distortion takes place. And what's the meaning of that distortion, or what's the scope of that distortion? Image and likeness. In his image and likeness he created them. Image and likeness begin to split apart. That is the existential aberration that is always part of being human. And spirituality must be the attempt to reverse this process. That is, rather than allow the image and likeness to split apart, my essence and my present state of being, my essence as, shall I say, an item of divinity ensconced in the flesh, the essential soul, my soul existence, and then my fleshly existence, how people experience me and what I really am. See, many people in this world live feeling completely aggrieved and agonizing over the fact that they're never truthfully understood by others. I've had that experience umpteen times. It's a very deep pain that you are never understood as you are. Others are not capable of it, and also you yourself are incapable of expressing the true self that you are. So, authentic personality results only when the image and likeness which were one at the time of creation, in this image and likeness, not image or likeness. In his image and likeness he created them, which means that when human beings were designed by God. If you believe in creation at all, if you are an evolutionist, then this thing will not make any sense to you. The way God imagined humanity is the complete oneness, harmony, holistic, organic oneness of image and likeness. The aberration that has come about, and which is what is sought to be explained through the doctrine of the original sin, is that they split apart. That is death. Spiritual death is a splitting apart of the image and likeness. So initially, image and likeness were like this. Through the fall of man, through this element of aberration that infiltrated into the human, what happened? Split apart. So image went this way, likeness went this way, resulting in a serious spiritual disrelationship within ourselves. We live as a spiritual contradiction. That's why we feel the pull of flesh against the spirit and the mind pulling in another direction. So, as Shakespeare says in one of his plays, I am at myself in war. I am a theatre of war myself. And that is a description of the state in which the image and likeness have split apart. Healing is the reconstitution, the reattachment, the reintegration of the image and likeness so that we become authentic wholes. There is no contradiction in us. That is when we become light. Now, this can be also understood through the analogy of the battery. A battery has two terminals. Let's call one terminal image and the other terminal likeness. When the two terminals are connected, light comes. In the same manner, when our godly essence and our earthly existence become one, we become light. I believe that's the sense in which Jesus said, you are the light of the world. And he said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Right? So this is really the treasure that will last. This authentic self, this healed personality, this complete holistic reintegration of the image and likeness so that there is no contradiction, there is no hypocrisy, there is no inner warfare in us at all. We are at peace. We are the light. Only that light can enter heaven. Now, if anyone tells you that by being a faithful Marthomite, by being a faithful CSI, a person, by a faithful Catholic or a speaking in tongues kind of Pentecostal, you will enter into heaven, please run away from him. He is a confirmed religious nitwit. He knows nothing. He is incorrigible in his religious stupidity. He knows absolutely nothing. Certainly, he knows nothing of what Jesus has taught. So, the treasure that Jesus said we should gather, the treasures of heaven which are to be gathered here upon this earth, is our own healed, integrated personality. And the hallmark or the essence of that personality is that image and likeness, our essence and our appearance, our effect, become one, and then we become the light. Therefore, whether or not we are eligible to attain heaven can be understood only, as Jesus said, in terms of the beneficial godly impact or effect we have on the world around us, which he also denoted through the metaphor of fruit. John chapter 15, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me, you will produce fruit. Jesus also said, you shall know a tree by its fruits. So, if your life is entirely fruitless, if you are leading an inauthentic life, or borrowing the words from the book of Revelation, if you have lost your first love, if you have only the name of being alive but you are dead, you are neither hot nor cold but lukewarm, all these are conditions that denote your poverty in terms of the treasures of heaven. You may be very, very rich in terms of the treasures of this world, which the thief can break in and steal. But in terms of the treasures of heaven, you are bankrupt. So that is the realization that Jesus tries to bring into this world. And I find it extremely useful, even if I may not have succeeded in taking full advantage of this revelation by Jesus. Therefore, you can now answer the question as to where you are headed, to heaven or to hell. Now, it's precisely because people become aware of this in a very vague kind of fashion when they enter old age and are slowly approaching their death. And somehow at the back of their minds, they realize that all their life, religious life, the life that they've led, is completely irrelevant to these eternal realities, that they begin to panic because they realize they don't have the visa. They thought they were issued a ticket by the church to go to heaven, but they don't have the visa. So, and it's a situation of understandable panic. And with that panic, with that anxiety, with that inner torment, they can't go back to the church and get an answer. Therefore, they go and knock at doors here, there, and everywhere. And some come and knock at my door as well, as I've occasion to point out earlier. So I thought this was an important of insight to devote about 36 minutes. I'm sorry, it got a little longer than I should have. But then I had to explain a few things for the first time. Therefore, I hope if you're really interested, you will see it at least twice and try and understand the basic pattern and use it as a yardstick to measure where one stands, to audit the self as it were. Then you will know where the truth lies. Thank you. All the very best.